Welcome back to the Barrel Talk Podcast. We are back with another episode of Let's Talk About It. The NBA season is starting in just a couple of weeks, and we got to continue our series of doing a deep dive into every single NBA team before this upcoming season. But before we get into talking about the Indiana Pacers, make sure to leave a like on the video, comment your best take on this NBA season coming up, and also make sure to subscribe to the channel. We got NFL and NBA content on the way. But without further ado, we can get into the Indiana Pacers and what I think this season is going to look like for them. But starting out with last season, losing in the Eastern Conference Finals, where if it wasn't for a couple bad kind of mistakes by Tyrese Halliburton, I think they win at least one or two of those games against Boston, especially that first either game one or game two when Jrue Holiday made the defensive stop on Tyrese Halliburton. They should have won at least two games in that Eastern Conference Finals, in my opinion. I think this Indiana Pacers team definitely exceeded expectations based on last year with how young this roster is, and people are obviously going to put a little bit of an asterisk on it. I won't, but a lot of people are going to put an asterisk on it because they beat a hurt New York Knicks team. They beat a hurt Milwaukee Bucks team in the first two rounds of the playoffs, but I do think this team can repeat that level of success because of the kind of makeup of this team and this roster and how they play offensively. Looking back on it, Tyrese Halliburton, obviously career year, had that kind of middle of the season kind of weird spot where he was dealing with the hamstring injury. He got through that. You trade for Pascal Siakam, which changes the entire outlook on this team. They do not get to where they get to in this end of the season last year without Pascal Siakam. But I think this is a very interesting season for them because I don't think they're really in the top echelon of teams in the Eastern Conference. I think they're kind of in that same tier with like the Orlando Magics and the Cleveland Cavaliers of the world, and kind of like the Miami Heat if you want to throw them in there as well, in that kind of tier right below the top echelon teams in the Eastern Conference. But I do think with how they play, they're going to be able to compete with anybody on any given night, which is what makes this team so intriguing because I really, really do like what we saw out of Andrew Nembhard in the playoffs last year. I feel like his growth is huge for this team because he's a secondary ball handler off of Tyrese Halliburton, plays off of Tyrese Halliburton really, really well. And I think he's going to continue to grow defensively as well. We saw times in that New York Knicks series where Jalen Brunson was really picking him out of the lineup to go at. And I think we will eventually see him grow defensively. But I do think many people don't talk about Benedict Mathurin, who was hurt all of really the back half of last year, which I feel like in a low-key way kind of helped the development and growth of somebody like an Andrew Nembhard, just because I think this Indiana Pacers team, yes, you have a lot of depth, but they also have a lot of depth to where like there's a lot of guys that should be playing, and it's kind of hurting some of the younger development on this team that they do have. So looking at some of their offseason moves, nothing crazy and major. They bring in somebody like a James Wiseman to be a backup big who took a flyer on him. I really, really like that move. I think this is the perfect offense that's going to be able to suit somebody with his skill set, just getting up and down. So you bring in him, you don't really do too much, you re-up on Nembhard, you bring back Obi Toppin, which I think is a low-key move to be able to make a pivot move because you still have Jarris Walker, you drafted Johnny Furphy. Looking at that, Obi Toppin, you re-up with him, he's making about $13 million a year. That could be a pivot to make a possible another move in the future, which I really, really like what they do. And I think Obi Toppin fits what they want to do perfectly if they don't make that move. Going into what I think their starting five, I think it's going to be the same starting five. I think Tyrese Halliburton, Nembhard, Nesmith, Siakam, and Miles Turner. Looking at this, I think the X factor has to be Andrew Nembhard. I know what I'm getting from Siakam. I know what I'm getting from Turner. I know what I'm getting from Halliburton at this point. And then whatever you do get from Aaron Nesmith offensively is a bonus to what I know he's going to give you defensively. So looking at this, I think Andrew Nembhard is definitely the X factor for this team. If he can make another jump, I think this can be one of the more elite backcourts in the league. But it all depends on if he can make that significant jump because you still have somebody in TJ McConnell who can also still run the show off the bench. So Andrew Nembhard is in a spot where I think he will take a leap. I think if he can get somewhere between averaging 15 to 18 points a game with still giving you that level of playmaking and that level of shooting, I think this Indiana Pacers team can be very, very dangerous still with the way they play. And I think they can become one of the more elite backcourts in the NBA with his development. In terms of my personal expectations for this team going forward, in the regular season, they're going to be a very hard team to keep up with like they were this year. I think with the style of play and how deep they are, I think it's a recipe to win regular season games on a nightly basis. I mean, I think even without somebody like a Tyrese Halliburton, because of a TJ McConnell and Andrew Nembhard, I think this offense can still work really, really well, even if Tyrese Halliburton were to go down. And even if Pascal Siakam goes down, you still have an Obi Toppin, a Jarris Walker that needs minutes, Johnny Furphy that needs minutes as well. So I think they have the depth to withstand an injury. And then during the regular season, that's something that people don't really get talked about enough. In terms of team construction, this Indiana Pacers team is very, very deep to where if one of those main two guys go down, I think they will be just fine at picking up the pieces to make a little bit of a cushion to stay afloat until those guys do return. That's just saying if they do get hurt or anything like that. But I think they're still going to be above the plan. I think with the style of play that they have, they're going to win a lot of regular season games. But it's just when it comes to competing with the upper echelon in the Eastern Conference, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how they match up with the Boston this year, with the Philly this year with all the moves they've made, with the New York Sam with all the moves they've made. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see. But this season, I definitely think the Indiana Pacers are a team to watch out for at the trade deadline, because when you're looking at this team, and I have the roster pulled up right here, I've talked about their depth, but there's so many question marks of like, I think they're going to pivot and make a move, because you bring back Obi Toppin, you traded for Pascal Siakam, you have Jarris Walker, who's somebody you drafted now 2 years ago, who didn't really play at all last year. Now you re-upped with both of Pascal Siakam and Obi Toppin. Where do those minutes come in? You drafted Johnny Furphy, a shooter, but I feel like even then, like, where are his minutes coming from? You still have Ben Shepherd, you have Benedict Mathurin, Isaiah Jackson still on the roster, obviously Nembhard, Tyrese Halliburton. Like, where are these minutes coming from for these guys? Aaron Nesmith, I think he gives you, for what you're paying, I think he is a steal of a player for what he gives you defensively, and he's a perfect fit offensively, getting up and down. So I'm very interested to see how and what moves they could possibly pivot to and move at the deadline, because it's to the same point where, like, you have a Ben Shepherd who I really, really liked what he gave you last year, but like, where are you finding minutes for him? Because you just re-upped with TJ McConnell as well, and I think you could get a nice return for somebody like a Benedict Mathurin and a Jarris Walker. And maybe if you wanted to throw Obi Toppin in the mix too, to go pivot and maybe add some more firepower to this team that already has plenty of it. But I just think when you're looking at what they have, I think you can trade Benedict Mathurin, package him up with Obi Toppin's contract, maybe go pivot and make a different kind of move to really bolster up this roster, because in the Eastern Conference, I don't know if they have enough to really beat a Boston Celtics team in a 7-game series, a Philadelphia team, a New York Knicks team if they're fully healthy in a 7-game series. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how everything plays out for them this season, but I do want to keep an eye out on the Indiana Pacers going into next year's trade deadline, because I definitely think they can be very, very active with all the young assets, maybe not draft capital, but all the young assets that they do have. When I'm thinking of somebody like maybe a Cam Johnson in Brooklyn, maybe if they wanted to add some more shooting on that wing position, maybe a Dorian Finney-Smith to add a little bit more defense, they could definitely be in the market to move some of those younger guys to go get more win-now talent, which I think they're kind of in that bridge middle position of having a very, very young team, but I think they also are in a win-now situation. They're playing the perfect balance between the two, but this year's deadline, I think they're definitely going to be more active than people might think, depending on how this season goes around and rolls around at that point in time. But the main question I do have for this team, kind of translate into what I just got done talking about at the trade deadline, is this team one move away? They definitely have the younger talent to make that move, but I still question if this team is still one move away from really competing with the upper echelon of teams out east. But I do think their style of play and the continuity they do have bringing back, and I think they're really, really well coached. I think they are a team that is not just going to be a one-hit wonder kind of team and make that one big run. I think this team can replicate the success because of their style of play and how they're coached, and definitely the avenues they do have to getting better at this year's deadline. I do think the Indiana Pacers are going to be a really, really good team this year. But that is all I have talking about a deep dive into the Indiana Pacers before this upcoming season. Make sure you leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, helps out a ton. But thank you guys for tuning into the Barrel Talk podcast. Hope you tune in to future episodes.